I don't know, for some reason, I just felt like making a video about this one particular Superman story. So random. Let's talk about a giant prestige format one shot originally published in 1998, written by Paul Dini with art by Alex Ross from a story by Ross and Dini called Superman Peace on Earth. We start out with a sepia-toned recounting of the origin story, planet Krypton, baby in a rocket, Kansas farmers, secret identity as Clark Kent, reporter for a major metropolitan newspaper, etc., etc. Then we see a memory of Clark Kent as a boy, being shown by his father how to broadcast seeds. Scatter them a few at a time, Pa says. Let them fall evenly down the rows. Give them enough space. Clark recalls, he knew not every seed would make it, but Pa wanted to give each one the chance to grow. Cut to the present day, and it's Christmas time. Superman loves Christmas. Of course he does. He's Superman. He likes how the holiday brings with it a spirit of goodwill and encourages people to see the best in each other. He flies in a humongous Christmas tree and places it in the center of the city and decorates it in a blur of super speed. But as he's flying away, he notices a young woman in the crowd who is in distress. He swoops down and catches her just as she faints and flies her to a nearby shelter. The young woman is homeless and weak from hunger. He returns to the shelter the next day as Clark Kent and asks about the girl Superman dropped off the night before. She's a runaway from the South. She came to Metropolis hoping to find a better life, but had trouble getting a job and making friends and wound up on the street. If not for Superman, she may have died. It's too bad Superman can't be there for everyone in need, says Rebecca, the doctor at the shelter. At the Daily Planet, Clark does research on the problem of world hunger. He casts his thoughts back to his sepia-toned childhood once again, remembers his father telling him about the abundance the earth was capable of creating, how there was always enough food produced to feed everyone on the planet. The problem was that people aren't so great at sharing. Maybe, Pa Kent said, someday someone could step in and make people realize what the world has to offer, and how easy it would be to feed all of humanity if everyone did their part. Superman thinks about it and comes to a decision. He tells us through his narration that he's always thought of his superpowers as belonging not just to him, but to everyone, to anyone who needs them. He doesn't want to dictate policy or to try and force people to live a certain way, but perhaps if he uses his powers to gather and distribute the resources to feed the entire world for just one day and shows that it's possible, his example will inspire the governments of the world to do more to fight the problem of hunger in the long term. So he goes to Congress to ask permission, like a dork. Oh, please, can I take the surplus food that would just go to waste and distribute it to the starving people of the world, please? What are you afraid of, Superman? That the farmers are going to object to you harvesting the unsold crops that would otherwise rot in their fields? So what if they do? You just take the shit anyway and give them the finger as you fly away with it. That's how you handle a farmer. Anyway, after debating the matter, Congress reluctantly gives Superman permission to feed starving people. Superman spends a few days gathering up all the surplus food he can find from the United States and other countries who want to help him in his mission. His narration also mentions some skepticism from certain voices in the media and the general public. Gee, I wonder who those would be if this was real life and happening today. Any guesses? How many angry white dudes with YouTube channels and podcasts would be doing 4-hour shows where they just sit there and complain about Superman trying to address world hunger? Who the hell is he to feed all those people? Superman. When he's done collecting all the food, Superman sets off to deliver it to those in need. The day begins promisingly. He drops off a cargo container at the edge of a Native American village in the American Southwest, then does the same at a slum in Rio de Janeiro and in an unnamed European country that has been devastated by war. His gifts are all well received, but in the European countries, Superman is stopped by a question from a young boy. Will you be back tomorrow? Superman doesn't answer. As he continues on, Superman reminds himself that his mission isn't to solve world hunger in a day, but to provide relief to people who need it, and in doing so, to hopefully inspire the rest of the world to get more serious about implementing a permanent solution to the problem. Still, he makes every effort to feed all the people he can. While distributing food in Africa, he is distracted by the need to go do some Superman shit. First, a brush fire breaks out, threatening the nearby village. He takes care of that, but then there's a stampede of wild animals, spooked by the fire, that he has to deal with. He solves that crisis, then flies off to his next stop, where he runs into an even more dangerous obstacle than either the fire or the stampede: an army led by a local warlord. The warlord welcomes Superman and is like, "Hey, we know you're in a hurry, so just leave the food here. I'll make sure it gets to the people. No need to stick around or ever come back to check up on things." Superman doesn't trust the warlord and attempts to hand out the food to the people himself. The warlord counters by ordering his troops to train their guns on the people. He accuses Superman of trying to undermine his authority. If anything happens, he says, it will be Superman's fault. Superman's like, who does this asshole think he is, the United States Congress? I don't need his permission. Supes tosses some food to the people in defiance of the warlord's threat, and the warlord has his troops open fire. Superman blocks all their bullets at super speed and uses his heat vision to melt their guns, but he knows the warlord has more guns where those came from, so this time he admits defeat, drops the food, and leaves rather than endanger the people any further. The day continues to go badly from there. He delivers food to a town where the oppressed people are too scared to come out of their houses and get it, and ends up having to leave it for the rats. He attempts to deliver food to a place where the people outright reject him, throwing rocks at him and denouncing his unwanted interference in their affairs. Then he stops at a place where the people are so desperate that they swarm around him in a mob, and he is forced to drill into the ground to get away from them. Finally, in the worst defeat of the day, Superman is accused of violating the airspace of a country, and the military launches a missile at the ship filled with food he is carrying. Superman is unable to get out of the way in time due to the weight of his payload, and the missile finds its target. The tons of food is destroyed, blown up and poisoned so that it can be of no use to anyone. Superman manages to keep the poison cloud created by the explosion from harming any of the people on the ground, but that's a small victory. Dejected, Superman gives up and goes home. Sitting alone in his Metropolis apartment, Superman mentally beats himself up for the failure of his mission, for his hubris in thinking he could do it in the first place, and for letting down all the hungry people he wasn't able to reach. He begins to question the premise of his mission. He asks himself, was I trying to give the world the wrong gift? After taking a flight over Metropolis to clear his head, Superman grants an exclusive interview. To Clark Kent, naturally, fuck you, Lois, where he says that in his attempt to fight world hunger, he encountered an enemy even more formidable than the poverty in the slums. The poverty in the souls of selfish men. If there is a solution to the problem of hunger, Superman says, quoted in the interview he pretended to give to himself, it must be one that comes from the compassionate heart of man and extends outward toward his fellow man. He references the old proverb about giving someone a fish to feed them for a day and teaching them to fish to feed them for a lifetime, and says that simple message asks humankind to nurture with knowledge, to reach out to those in need and inspire others to do the same. That is life's greatest necessity and its most precious gift. Superman makes a plea to the people of the world to share what they have, including their knowledge, with those in need, to help create a future where there will be true peace on Earth. When spring comes, Clark Kent goes to a farm. I've always assumed it's his family's farm, but maybe it's another farm. It's not made clear, and it doesn't really matter. There's a group of kids there on a field trip from school. With everyone gathered around, Clark passes on the lesson his father taught him as a boy about scattering the seeds, distributing them evenly down the rows, giving them enough space. Not every seed will make it, Clark tells his students, but all of them deserve the chance to grow. Superman stories where he sets himself to solve a serious real-world problem are, I imagine, among the most difficult Superman stories to write. There's a very narrow channel that you've got to navigate as the storyteller between fantasy and reality. Obviously, Superman is a fantasy character, but if his character is to retain the power to engage us and to make us think and move us, the world he inhabits can't be so different from our own that it becomes unrecognizable. We need to be able to imagine that Superman exists here, in our world. If someone writes a Superman story where he wakes up one morning and says, "Hey, I know, I'm going to fix world hunger," and then he just does it, then the fictional world moves that much further away from the real world. You can only get away with that for so long, especially when the subjects are issues that we know aren't going to be fixed that easily in reality, like hunger or poverty or war. There's a famous two-page Superman story by Siegel and Schuster from 1940 called How Superman Would End the War, which depicts, get this, how Superman would end World War II by single-handedly defeating the Nazi army, then rounding up both Hitler and Stalin and delivering them to face justice before the League of Nations. I did a video about it in this series a few years ago. It's a poignant piece for a few reasons, not the least of which being that it was produced the year before the United States was pulled into the war, which was already raging in Europe. But it's a fantasy that doesn't warrant a reaction much stronger than a wistful sigh and, wouldn't that have been nice? With Superman Peace on Earth, Paul Dini and Alex Ross are aiming higher than that. And I think they hit the target. The book is the first of a series of 6 giant-sized one-shots written by Dini with art by Ross, published annually, well, almost annually, from 1998 to 2004. And even though I would recommend checking out the entire series, which was reprinted in a single volume called The World's Greatest Superheroes in 2005, I think this first entry is the best of the lot. It captures the essence of what makes Superman such a compelling character in a way that few stories do, and it manages to find its way safely through that narrow channel between fantasy and reality I mentioned earlier. The premise of the story isn't that different from the premise of the movie Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. In fact, from the first time I ever read it, I've regarded Peace on Earth as an example of what Superman 4 might have been like if it had been, just a lot better. Instead of setting himself to rid the world of nuclear weapons, Peace on Earth sees Superman focusing his efforts against another global, seemingly intractable socio-political evil: hunger. It's certainly a big enough problem for Superman to want to do something about. And, he's Superman. He's the ultimate good guy. He cares about those in need. That's his whole deal. So, of course, we want him to try and solve world hunger. It would be kind of weird if he didn't at least try to do something about it at some point. But for the reasons I've already discussed, he can't just solve the problem. That wouldn't ring true. We here in the real world know better. The solution to the problem Dini and Ross come up with is a variation on the solution they landed on in Superman 4, and the solution that most superhero stories that focus on widespread real-world problems ultimately settle on. Superman realizes that it's better if we figure out how to fix the problem ourselves. That solution keeps the story from veering too far into fantasy land, but it can also be unsatisfying dramatically speaking. Superman tries to fix a big social problem, realizes it's too big for him to fix, encourages us to fix it ourselves, and we end up right back where we started? Who the fuck wants to read that story? Thanks for nothing, Superman. Therein lies the genius of Ross and Dini's story. Their Superman is full of optimism and determination at the beginning of this mission to feed the world, but crucially, his goal is not as ambitious as it might have been. He knows going in that the problem of world hunger is too big for him to solve it permanently. He only wants to feed the world for a single day, to prove that it can be done, to show everyone that there is plenty of food to go around. We just need to start actually sharing it around. So from the beginning, there is the expectation that humanity is going to have to do this on our own. Superman wants to show us the way, not do our work for us. Ross and Dini also tie Superman's eventual realization that he is trying to give the wrong gift, as he says, to a strong image, and one that has deep personal significance to Superman: the hand casting the seeds. At the beginning of the book, that hand belongs to Superman's father. At the end, it belongs to Superman himself. as he teaches the technique and the philosophy it represents to another generation. This visual and verbal poetry has the effect of elevating the inevitable "we have to fix this ourselves" ending, turning it from an expected and mundane development into something higher, something beautiful. It also helps, thematically and plot-wise, that what ultimately dooms Superman's feed the world in a day mission to failure isn't the immensity of the task itself, but the resistance he finds in much of the world. He's fighting not just against poverty and famine, but against the corruption of self-serving political and military leaders, and in some places against the fearful and suspicious attitudes of the people themselves, who refuse to accept help they didn't ask for, from a source they do not trust. I want to talk about the artwork, but, do I even need to? It's Alex Ross. It's beautiful. Actually, I do want to say something more than that, because I think sometimes, from certain critics and also certain segments of the audience, Alex Ross gets a bum rap. His work is described dismissively as photorealistic. He's sometimes accused of being too stiff or relying too heavily on obvious references. And look, sometimes he is guilty of that. He's guilty of it in this book, but no artist is perfect, and it's no more fair to judge Alex Ross by the weakest parts of his game than it would be to do that to anyone else. Yes, his work can look overly studied. How many times has he drawn that pose of Superman opening his shirt to reveal the S while looking off into the distance? And his art is a lot more realistic than a lot of most other artists in superhero comics, but that doesn't make the worlds he creates any less fantastic. There's a reason he's been so popular for so long. Not everything popular is bad. In Peace on Earth, Ross reminds us that he knows how to do more than draw iconic characters in heroic poses. The opening pages, depicting first the retold to death origin story and then the memory of young Clark learning to plant the field with his father, feature some of my favorite artwork in the whole book. The sepia color scheme feels like a too obvious shortcut at first, but there's more going on than just the colors. There's also the lighting, rendering everything in contrasting tones of bright light and faded shadow. The scene composition and proportions are realistic, but the style is closer to Impressionism. When we move into the main part of the story, there are all the trademarks of Ross's work, the backgrounds filled with specific faces, the tactile details like folds and textures in the fabric of clothing, and meticulously drawn individual needles on the Christmas tree Soups delivers near the beginning. Sometimes scenes can feel emotionally cold or too carefully posed, but overall, for me at least, the effect is very immersive. Ross knows the difference between a page and a pinup, and the layouts throughout the book, which are fluid and mostly prioritize story over spectacle, testify to that. And when Ross does occasionally indulge himself and take a page or two to draw what could just as easily be a poster, how can I complain when the result is something like this gorgeous image of Superman soaring above Earth, with the faces of a few of the hungry millions he was trying to help superimposed over the lower corner? I love Alex Ross's Superman. He's George Reeves, only bigger and with a sharper profile. His Clark Kent is a classic take on the character, with his fedora and trench coat or crisp long-sleeved shirt and vest when in the office. And his Superman is simultaneously modern and a throwback to the earliest days of the character. The slightly muted shades of blue and red, the S shield taking up almost his entire chest, but without the typical sculpted action figure physique. Ross's Superman doesn't look like a bodybuilder. He looks like a big, fit, barrel-chested, naturally powerful guy. He might not win any pose downs, but he will definitely catch your nose-diving airplane before it hits the ground. And I think that's more important, really. Dini's script and Ross's art work well together because they're both doing the same thing, blending the mythic with the real. Superman, by his very nature, is larger than life, but for his adventures to mean anything to us, we need to believe that he walks in our world. That's what gives the images their power, and that's what allows this story to land in a way that similar stories, Superman 4, for instance, don't. Superman's mission to feed the world for a day doesn't fail because the job is too big. It doesn't even fail, ultimately, because of the resistance he encounters in some locations along the way. It fails because of a simple miscalculation on Superman's part. He starts off believing that he can inspire the rest of the world to take action against hunger by proving that there is enough food to go around, that the problem is solvable. What he discovers, to his disappointment, is that the problem isn't a lack of imagination, but a lack of empathy. Hunger persists as a global problem because of those who choose their own selfish, provincial interests over the interests of humanity. Too many powerful people in governments, militaries, religions, industries would rather protect the status quo that privileges them than act to lift up those in need. Superman's insight about teaching people to fish rather than giving them fish isn't just about sharing knowledge and encouraging self-sufficiency. It's about realizing that caring about other people and wanting to make their lives better in a lasting way is the first step. And that first step is necessary not only to eradicate hunger, but every other plague that afflicts the world. Poverty, bigotry, inequality, environmental destruction, war. It's not that we can't solve these problems, it's that enough of us need to want to. We need to get to the point as a species where we are willing to take that first step ourselves. Nobody can take it for us. Not even the best Superman ever.